Welcome to the Beau Show, the home of faith, family, and freedom, from our nation's capital in Washington, D.C. Well, we are on the other side of the midterm elections, which have been a defining moment in our history. In midterm elections, history tells us that the president's party usually loses, which indicates the ebb and flow and pendulum swing of politics. If you don't like what the president is doing, you punish him with your vote. It is common for the American public to just be ornery and go the other direction in a two-party system. It is the nature of the beast. Rarely can a president hold on to both chambers of Congress in midterm elections. In this particular midterm, we are experiencing some similar feelings of 2010, when Obama had been in power for 2 years and voters decided to flip both the House and the Senate. We are in a similar scenario in which the Democrats have the presidency, the House, and the Senate, although by a razor-thin margin. So these midterms have tremendous significance in terms of the direction of the country, which 75% of Americans think is going the wrong way. And we have seen that play out in a number of hotly contested seats, especially in the Senate. But equally important are the gubernatorial elections, because we have seen a resurgence of states' rights. And this is the first time since the 2020 pandemic that voters have had to make a real choice about how they want their state to be run. Each governor made a very specific decision about how he or she would handle pandemic regulations, lockdowns, and business closures and reopenings. So voters had a number of decisions to make: local, statewide, governor, and then their representatives in D.C. I know that they always tell you this is the most important election of our lifetime, but most of us would agree that this midterm is a watershed moment because so many decisions are being made about the direction of the country. Things like critical race theory, the education system, transgenderism, wokeism, the economy, the border, immigration, abortion, marijuana, and crime were all on the ballot this time around. Both Joe Biden and Donald Trump, and even Barack Obama, used their presidential stature to stump for a number of candidates. And believe it or not, these presences actually do make a difference, some for the better, some for the worse. I'd like to look at the various issues that are on the ballot, especially leading up to the midterms, what we anticipated, and what actually happened. I made some predictions a few weeks ago, so I want to revisit those to find out how right or wrong I was. I'm not a gambler, but just had some intuition about what might happen. From the polling of a group called Convention of States, here is some pre-midterm data. 2/3 of Americans say Democrats have not made a case to earn votes in midterms. Over 80% of voters say Republicans will win control of one or both chambers in Congress. 60% of independents believe their friends and family are voting Republican in midterms. 54% of voters say that rising gas prices will make them more likely to vote for Republicans in midterm elections. And nearly 70% say skyrocketing food prices are motivating them to vote in midterms. Now let's look at policies that may have affected the vote. Over 70% of Americans say they won't vote for a candidate who supports transgender procedures for youth. 77% of voters say that they're not voting for candidates who support Democrat policies preventing police from effectively dealing with violent crime. And 56% are less likely to vote for a candidate who supports President Biden's student loan forgiveness plan. I do find that last one significant because I kind of thought the student loan forgiveness plan would be a home run for Biden, especially with millennials and younger voters. 2/3 of independents believe their friends and neighbors are afraid to say who they will vote for in midterms. That means that there's a certain level of intimidation, or what you might call voter timidity. But this also means that those pollster phone calls you get are also not necessarily accurate. For instance, if you wanted to vote for Herschel Walker in Georgia or Dr. Oz in Pennsylvania, are you going to say it out loud? Especially when Oprah and The View came out in support of John Fetterman? Do you think you'll be chastised at work? Would you post it on social media? I think not. Almost 60% of voters believe that Joe Biden is more of a divider than a uniter, and that his recent speech in Philadelphia damning most Republicans was inflammatory rhetoric. Even 62% of independents said that. And I think independents and women were crucial in this election because we kind of knew how partisan Republicans and Democrats were going to vote, but independents and even libertarians certainly had a say. However, only 34% of voters felt that House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy made a compelling case to back Republican candidates, even though a majority support Republican policies. That means that the leadership and messaging were uncompelling. I watched McCarthy's town hall, and while I understood the trajectory of it, it was not exciting. It had a very Biden-like lack of enthusiasm, which is it's hard to do. But when you compare a Trump rally to a serious sit-down town hall, it just lacks energy, even when the policy moves are on your side. And let's examine those. I think for most voters, the economy was number one. We saw the economy slide into a recession, which was fueled by excessive spending during the pandemic. The furloughed and laid off found it easier to take the free money than to go back to work. So it created a supply chain crisis. And then inflation began to rise. The pundits over at MSNBC think that inflation is a made-up word by Republicans to scare people. Inflation has been around for centuries. It's a very real thing. Food prices soared and remain high. And very early on in the Biden presidency, even before the war in Ukraine, gas prices started to rise. This was a furtive but methodical part of Biden's war on the oil and gas industry. So when he pulled the "it's Russia's fault" card, the logic just seemed dubious. It was also part of an agenda to wean Americans off of gasoline and onto electric. So it was an intentional squeeze. Then you look at crime. During 2020, when the anxiety was high, we saw a spike in crime. And it went largely without consequences. This affected everyone. Immigration became an area of concern as 2022 saw the highest number of immigrant apprehensions in American history. This was due to Biden's careful flirtation with immigrants. But in turn, it created the largest human trafficking and fentanyl influx in history. We have a new number one cause of death in people 18 to 45 due to this fentanyl explosion. So now that we have some context to what we were thinking heading into the midterms, let's look at the results and see if they followed suit. I predicted that Republicans would gain about 20 seats in the House of Representatives, and most people predicted that the GOP would comfortably take this chamber. All in all, the GOP looks poised at this moment to take the House, with 208 seats currently. 42 seats are still not quite decided. Notable were the Texas triple threat of Mayra Flores, Monica de la Cruz, and Cassie Garcia, who were Republican Latina women running in Democrat districts in South Texas. They only went 1 for 3, with Garcia being the only winner of those 3 contests. Now let's go on to the Senate. Ohio saw Republican J.D. Vance trounce Tim Ryan. Ohio can go either way, but Vance handily carried the seat. In Nevada, Adam Laxalt is holding on to a very thin lead right now, and we have to wait and see. But he'd be flipping that seat. Nevada is also peculiar in its voting and tends to lean blue. Remember that this is Harry Reid territory. But the blue-collar workers in the gaming industry must have decided possibly to go in a different direction. In Florida, Marco Rubio defeated Val Demings by a large margin, even when Demings hammered Rubio on the issue of abortion. And as we know, the Supreme Court's decision to kick the abortion decision down to the states was an issue Dems were going to run on. I live in Florida, so I saw a lot of ads. Dems used the abortion issue to scare women into the notion that Republicans don't want women to have a choice. It's basically all they could run on. But in Florida, where the law is still at 15 weeks, it was hard to convince voters that Rubio was anti-woman. But really, this came down to about 4 states. Nevada was 1, Arizona, Pennsylvania, and Georgia.